First, you need to start with a Tunisian crochet foundation row. If you don't know how to do that, I have a link in the description for my tutorial on the basics of Tunisian crochet. And for the honeycomb stitch, it's a 2-stitch repeat. We use the Tunisian simple stitch and the Tunisian purl stitch. If you don't know how to do those, I have a tutorial link in the description for both of those as well. So at the beginning of every row, you already start with your first stitch on your hook, so you need to find your next stitch along. So the 2-stitch repeat is Tunisian simple stitch and then Tunisian purl stitch. And you keep repeating those all the way across. Tunisian simple stitch, Tunisian purl stitch, simple stitch, purl stitch, simple stitch, purl stitch. And this is a 2-stitch repeat, but that does not mean you have to have an even number of stitches to do this pattern. You can also do an odd number of stitches. So if you do an odd, you keep repeating those 2 stitches over and over, and then just end with the one that is not the same as the last stitch you worked. All right, so you keep repeating those all the way across until you get to your last stitch. And here's our last stitch, and those are always worked the same by going through the 2 loops on the edge, yarn over and pull up a loop. And then work your return pass, yarn over and pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2 the rest of the way across. So this is a 2-row repeat, and just like it being a 2-stitch repeat, it does not need to be an even number of rows either. You can end on any row that you want. So for the second row of the honeycomb stitch, you do the opposite of what you did for the first row. So you start with a Tunisian purl stitch, and then do a Tunisian simple stitch, and keep repeating that over and over. Purl stitch, simple stitch, purl stitch, simple stitch. And if you ever lose track, or you have to set your work down and come back to it and you forget where you left off, just look at what the stitch is on the bottom. So this next stitch here that I have to work, on the previous row it was a Tunisian simple stitch, so that means it needs to be purled. And then this one is purled, because you can see the bump here. So I need to work a Tunisian simple stitch. So you have to do the opposite of the previous row. And keep repeating that till you get to your last stitch. And then there's my last stitch. So I go through those 2 loops on the edge and pull up a loop. And then you work your return pass. And that is the 2-row repeat for that. So you would just keep repeating those 2 rows and those 2 stitches. And if you ever lose track, you just look at your previous row and do the opposite of that. And that is how you do the honeycomb stitch.